So my background in mining history, well, that probably started when I was a little kid. My dad would take me out gold panning when I was just a little squirt, probably before I could even remember. And then when I was around 8 years old, he bought a patented mining claim. It was a patented lode claim, but it had placer gold on it, along with a couple old incline shafts on it. That whole area, lots of mining history. So when I was a kid, I spent all my time, all my summers, weekends up there riding around on my dirt bike, exploring all these placer mines and old hard rock mines. So that really got my interest started in mining. And then later, my parents bought this book. I think I may have a copy. This might actually be this same book, Oregon's Golden Years by Miles Potter. I spent hours upon hours reading this book and learning about all the old mines. And he was fortunate enough to be around when a lot of the old timers were still around, and he got direct stories from them. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that anymore. So we have to rely on things like this to get that history. But that, I was not interested in a lot of reading when I was younger, but put a book about mining history in front of me, I'll sit and read that all day long. So that's kind of how I got started in the whole mining history thing. But then, I was involved in a couple small operations. I guess you could consider them commercial. We were trying to make money. They were definitely small operations, but, and did we make any money? Well, we paid for our fuel. But, so, I've had this long history with mining. I consider myself a recovering prospector / miner. And you could tell from my videos that's kind of, I still have that part in me. I want to know about the ore. I want to know about the geology and, so on and so forth. So which mines in particular? Well, all of them have a certain level of history that intrigues me. There's these big mines like the ones around the Sumter area, like the Columbia E&E lodes, all along that lode vein. The Cornucopia, the Virtue, all of those bigger mines. There's quite a bit of information written about those. And those intrigue me in their own way. But then there's all these smaller mines around that, that was somebody's hopes and dreams of striking it rich. They poured their heart, soul, finances. They probably borrowed money to try and make those operations work. And unfortunately, a lot of that information is lost to history. We don't know a lot of that information besides maybe a few newspaper articles here and there that I've been able to dig up. But a lot of that information is gone, unfortunately. I try and capture as much of it as I can, but some of it's gone. So the Cornucopia group, there's a lot of claims involved in that, and the ones that interest me the most, well, they all, again, hold a certain level of interest for me. There's the bigger parts of the operation, like the Last Chance vein and the Union Companion, and all the workings. That's 36 miles of workings, mainly on those two veins. And just like the Coulter Tunnel, this 8,000 foot long tunnel that they dug in a very short period of time to get back there to the Union Companion vein, that in itself is an amazing piece of history. But there's all these these smaller claims that are around it, maybe operations that didn't take off. They may have even been working the same veins. But, again, we're kind of lost to some history here on why didn't those pan out? Were the veins not as rich at that point? Did they pinch out on that claim? What was the story there? So those all interest me. But two in particular that really have intrigued me for as long as I can remember are the Simmons and the Queen of the West. Now the Simmons was the first vein they actually found gold in. It's up canyon and on the opposite side of the canyon from most of the Cornucopia. We'll dive into that one on another time. But the Queen of the West, it's up canyon on the same side though as the Cornucopia. Now this mine has quite a bit of information written about it, but not a lot of information. There's a lot of stories written about this mine. but there's not a ton of information. Like, we don't know if it was an incline shaft. We don't have any maps of the mine. We don't know what the ore was like, what it essayed out to be. There's all that information that I just really want to know, but I have not been able to find hardly anything on that mine in that regard. Now, there's stories about guys riding the tram and all that. So my adventures into the mine, it started a few years back. It was actually, I think, the second YouTube video I made. I decided I'm going to go in there and film the Queen of the West. I'd never been in there. It's always intrigued me. So I thought, well, I'm going to film parts of the Cornucopia, then I'm going to hike into there to the Queen of the West in the afternoon. Well, I got in there and I hiked in for the first time on the trail that goes to the Last Chance. And on Google Earth, it looks like, oh, it's just walk across this basin and you're over there to that mine, the Queen of the West. Well, I got up in there and looked across and I'm like, wow, that is steep. And that's one of the reasons there's so much written about that Queen of the West mine, is it's so inaccessible. It's up on cliffs. There's one little hogback that they were able to put buildings on. All around it is cliffs. Above its cliffs, below its cliffs. It's pretty amazing where it's built. And I don't think I'd comprehended how steep that country was when I looked at it on maps. You know, just, oh yeah, let's hike in there to that mine. Well, after I got in there, I was like, I'm by myself. It's late in the day. I'm tired. That would be stupid to try and hike in there. So I'm not going to do it. But ever since then, it's been in the back of my mind, I need to find out more about this mine. So I decided before I go hiking in there, it would probably be smart to fly a drone over up to that mine and look at it. So that's been the latest adventure. Took the family over, we went camping, and I just glanced at a map. I said, well, it's about 1.5 miles hike up the bottom of the canyon to where the old mill site was. We could do that. So we started up in there. It was hot. We got about 1 mile, maybe a little over 1 mile in. Our kids got tired. I said, okay, let's go back to camp, just enjoy ourselves. I'll come up here tomorrow and make that hike. So I hiked in the next day. I found the old mill site for the Queen of the West. Now this mill site, there was a pretty good road going in there at one time, probably back in the 1920s. But you know, now it's not much of a road. And that road was still in pretty good shape up through the 1950s. I'm not sure when it got into the condition it's in now, but it's still a good hiking trail. But I hike in there. Here's this mill site with a complete tin stamp operation. The stamps and the cams are still there. All the wood on the mill is completely gone for the most part. It's completely rotted away. Now, the original tram did go to this building. They had several towers between the terminal there at the mill and the mine, but those towers kept getting knocked over with avalanches. So they built another terminal up higher and made a free span tram. Now that tram was 4,300 feet clear span. At the time it was the longest and I think highest tram in the world. It didn't last for a long time holding that record, but for a while it was. So I found the mill site, you know, I looked around there. One notable thing up above the mill, I found what I thought was a barrel, wooden barrel. Turned out to be a wooden water pipe. It's almost completely rotted away. There's just the rings left, but in one little section there's still some wood left. It looked like a barrel sitting there. So that was really neat to see. In fact, I know I am. That's a wood pipe. Okay, there we go. I see the little trench they dug up through there to set the pipe in. I'm not sure if they had their own Pelton wheel and produced electricity there, or whether they got power from down below where the Cornucopia produced power. I'm not real sure. Again, that's one of those details that we don't have on this mine. But after I looked around there a little bit, I decided, well, I'm going to go find the terminal location, the second terminal location. And I wasn't 100% sure where this would be. I had an old geologic map that kind of indicated it would be up on this hill. And I noticed on Google Earth there's something different looking right up there. So I hiked up there to it. And by the way, where this is located from where the trail starts, it's about 3.5, maybe a little over 3.5 miles. So I'm glad I didn't try and get the kids to walk completely in there. I probably would have been carrying them out of there. So I hiked up there on the trail. I step off the trail and I see these big metal rings on the ground. At first I thought it was cable wound up. And on the hike in, I'd seen cable up over these cliffs going up to the Queen of the West. You get the cable still there. So I got off the trail. I'm like, oh, there's more cable wound up right here. Well, upon further inspection, it's actually big steel rings. They had a big water tank there. Now, what they used the water tank for, I'm not 100% sure. But they had the big water tank there. I think I finally reached the point of the original, the tram going to the Queen of the West. You can see this huge, I'm guessing was a water tank here at one time. All the wood's rotted away. I walk a ways down that ridge and I'm thinking, maybe I'm in the wrong spot. I'm not seeing anything below this water tank. Maybe I missed it. And then I see cordwood stacked up, these 3-foot long pieces of wood all stacked up nice and neat. Like, okay, that's a good sign. I walk just a little bit further and I see the bull gear or bull wheel for the tram sitting there. And right beneath this old bull wheel is a shaft sinking bucket. I'm like, wow, okay, this is really neat. And there's some old gears sitting there. And looky there, an ore bucket. How cool is that? So I spent some time snooping around there, and then I walked on the other side of the ridge where I'm looking down towards where the mill would have been. And here is a complete ore bucket from the tram sitting there, an ore car sitting there. And that thrilled me because I've seen pictures of people riding in these old ore cars. And to think I'm looking at one that was maybe in one of these pictures, very possibly one of these ore cars that were in a picture. Now this was a gravity tram, so the loaded ore side would pull the empty or less loaded other side up and they would control it with braking. How cool is that? There's the actual carriage. Now this is what folks would ride in along with the ore. So that was really neat to see that. The big cable that you can clearly see going up the cliffs, that cable didn't move. That was stationary. They had a smaller 3/4 inch or so cable that pulled the cars up and down those big cables. So I'm sitting there looking at it and I'm thinking back to this picture I saw of a lady named Nellie Parker who had rode one of these things up.
Because my husband Bob was a man, and because he was a little older than I married when I was 17, he figured I didn't know anything at all about politics. That riled me, and I set about to prove I did. My first attempt at writing, a snappy 1,500-word article on politics from a woman's viewpoint, sold to a newspaper editor for $10, good going in 1920, and brought forth a promise from the editor to buy a 500-word article from me each week for $4 each. From then on, I was a lost woman. I had tasted literary blood and was out for the kill. I wrote articles on everything from angleworms to the passing of the cattle and sheep wars. To obtain materials, I scurried around the towns, deserts, and mountains, flushing up stories like a bird dog on the hunt. When Baker was experiencing semi-darkness because reservoirs were low due to a light snowfall the preceding winter, and there wasn't enough water to generate power for Baker and 7 other small towns, I put it all into an article I called When Nature Struck, which sold for $35. Bob was so amazed, he said, "My gosh, Nellie, I believe you could write an article on the moon being made of green cheese and sell it to a dairy magazine." Those were strong words of praise. They fed the fires of my ambition like kerosene on a brush fire. Each week I tossed off an article for the paper, and I frequently received a small check from a trade journal. One day in about 1922, I read that a giant aerial tram line had recently been installed at the Queen of the West mine in the Cornucopia district of the Eagle Mountains near Baker. It operated by gravity on 1 3/4-inch tram cables, looped across the canyon in a clear span of 4,300 feet with no intervening supporting towers. It was said to be the longest and highest one-span aerial tram in the world. At one place, the cables had a clearance of over 800 feet. It was to be used to convey ore from the Queen of the West mine, located on the top of the mountain, down to the mill on the floor of the canyon on the opposite side, and to take supplies to the upper workings, with the heavier load of ore pulling up the lighter cargo. "Bob, I just have to write on that thing. Think what an article it would make." "If you live to write it," Bob growled, "you're crazy. We don't need money that bad. Do you know how long 4,300 feet is, or how high 800 feet would seem sitting in an ore bucket, looking down, with nothing between you and a pile of rocks? I wouldn't ride that untamed thing if they gave me the Queen of the West mine." "Yes, but you never wanted to be a trapeze performer when you were a kid, and I did." It took me some time to talk him into letting me do it, and about as long to argue the manager of the mine, Mr. R.G. Amadin, into giving his permission. He was as full of objections as a dog is of fleas. It was finally arranged, however, that Mr. Amadin would go first, alone, and I would follow. Bob refused what he thought was an excellent opportunity to commit suicide in a spectacular way and stayed at the lower terminal to take my picture leaving on my trip into the air. But as I glided away, seated in the big iron bucket, he gave me an encouraging smile and a hearty, "Good luck, dear, and a nice trip." I hope that in everyone's life there will come the glorious thrill I experienced for the next few minutes as I soared over the canyon. It was a sparkling October morning, and a panorama of range after range of snow-capped mountains surrounded me. Often the Eagle Mountain District is called the Switzerland of America, and because of its rugged beauty, it deserves the name. Silently, I glided over tumbling streams and giant fir and pine trees. I looked down into quiet canyons and peered into deep crevices. Startled birds left their perches on rocky crags that jutted out from the face of the 1,500-foot precipice along which the tram traveled as it neared the upper terminal. It was a wonderful experience, and I stepped from the ore carrier when it reached the lofty mountaintop. I was filled with a deep reverence that clung to me all day. I had looked into the very heart of nature. The trip on the little electric car back into the tunnels came almost as an anticlimactic, not as exciting as sitting on the narrow, unrailed balcony of the cookhouse, which sits on the very edge of the 1,500-foot precipice. This and other mine buildings are built on the brink of the cliff to allow air and sunshine to come in through the windows on that side when the building is buried under 15 or 20 feet of snow. At about 4 p.m., Mr. Amadin and I climbed on top of the heavily loaded ore carrier, feet hanging over the sides, all set for the return trip. He refused to let me go alone, as there wasn't even the security of sitting inside the carrier. The ton of ore was necessary to force it downward. We left the sunshine on the mountaintop and almost immediately slid into the chill shadows of the foreboding precipice. Curiously, I looked down into the treetops in the canyon below. I wondered idly why sparks were flying out from a great outcropping of rocks below and just ahead of us. I decided our tow cable must operate down there somehow, as I was sure I would see it disappearing under some heavy timbers, which had been pointed out to me from the cookhouse. They said it was the wreck of a former tower which had been crushed by a snowslide the winter before when the old tram had 4 intermediate towers to support it. It was about 500 feet from the upper terminal. As we slid toward it, I thought we appeared to be losing altitude and were slowing down. Suddenly, we came to a full stop, in midair. As unfamiliar as I was with tram operations, I knew this was not right. "Oh my gosh, what's wrong?" rasped my seatmate. "I don't know, but I have been watching sparks below us where our tow cable swings." I got no further. One look at Mr. Amidon's face convinced me something appalling had happened to us. "We're stuck. Tow cable caught on the wreck." Turning toward the upper terminal, he shouted, "Put on the brakes. Telephone down below, there will be a delay, but assure them that we are all right. Then get the men to come out of the tunnel and come down below us with ropes, saws, spotlights, and blankets, and make it fast. Our tow cable has caught on the timber of the old tower, and the friction has probably burned it pretty far in. It'll be dark soon. Hurry up." He looked as worried as a hen with a family of ducklings near a lake. We were within 8 or 10 feet of the perpendicular wall of the precipice and opposite a narrow ledge where a sturdy pine tree grew out of a crevice. He studied this a moment and then asked, "If I throw this heavy rope and anchored it to that tree, could you get over there? Hand over hand?" "I'm afraid not. And besides, I don't trust a scrubby pine any more than I do this cable. Even if I got over there, how would I get off? That ledge is just a narrow 2-foot shelf and has no back door that I can see." "But I'd like you to get off this tram. What if you fainted?" "I'm not the fainting kind. And honestly, I'm not scared. They'll get us off by dark, won't they?" "Well, yes." "Then don't worry about me, but think of my frantic husband waiting below, not knowing what stopped us and probably imagining me in all sorts of trouble." He didn't answer, but peered doubtfully at the cruel pinnacle of rock below, upon which there was a tangled mass of cable and timbers. A sharp, cold wind was blowing down off the snow-capped peaks, bringing to us clearly the talk of the rescuers as they slowly worked their way down the precipice slopes. "We can't get them off that tram tonight. Dark by the time we get below 'em. That woman will freeze up there. Wonder how long that cable can hold. Pull down all it will stand. If that timber breaks, goners." After what seemed like hours, but was probably no more than half an hour, the men arrived at the old tower. Quickly they untangled a long piece of the former cable and threw it over our tow cable that was caught. With everyone hanging on, they sawed off the restraining timber, warning us to hold tight to the bale of the ore carrier, as we were likely to get a jolt. Gradually, the men paid out the old cable, allowing us to rise to normal position. But not quite. The cable was just a little short, and they had to allow us to bounce upward a slight distance. But it was far enough to set up a vibration that kept us bouncing gently after the brakes at the upper terminal were released, and we were again on our way, a distance of 4,000 feet further. I had, and needed, a corkscrew grip around that bale that caused the muscles of my arm to ache for days. The ledge that had been 2 or more feet above us was now more than twice that distance below us, showing how far we had been pulled down and what a dangerous strain it had been on that timber. As I looked at that small pine tree, I wondered how Mr. Amidon would have gotten me back on the tram again. Luckily, I didn't know, as he did, that there was no safety catch on the pulley that ran on the cable because the tram was never intended for passenger service. He feared a jolt would throw the ore bucket off the cable and let us crash on the rocks below. Personally, I was afraid that if the thing holding us down gave way, we would shoot right through the pearly gates. I learned from the men's talk that the trouble was caused by the additional weight of Mr. Amidon and myself, which made the tow cable swing just low enough to catch on the projecting timber that had always cleared when the bucket carried only a load of ore. Strangely enough, the man at the lower terminal had not seen cause for alarm at the stoppage of the tram, and Bob had taken his word for it that we were all right. As we approached the terminal in the dim light of dusk, I saw Bob hopping around frantically, waving his arms. Poor dear, he was even more anxious than I had anticipated. Then I heard, "Gosh, what kept you so long? I dang near froze to death." What? No worry? No hysterical scrambling around in the canyon looking for my mangled remains? Just cold? I didn't know whether to kiss him or kick him. Mr. Amidon looked at me with a wicked grin. "Is this the poor frantic husband you were worried about, Mrs. Parker, while you faced death?" This was the first that I knew I had faced death, and it still didn't frighten me. But in the middle of the night, I awoke in a cold sweat and shook for an hour, visualizing myself perched on a load of cold, wet ore with my feet hanging over the side of the tram bucket, suspended on a slender thread of steel almost a mile long. I must have injected some of the thrills and chills of my experience into an article I wrote, because it landed in the feature section of the Portland Oregonian, and I received a substantial check. I also sold 2 or 3 short articles to trade journals, that were interested in aerial trams. But after that hair raiser, Bob cracked down on any more cracked brain episodes, and life became normal once more.
You know, I am completely pumped to see this ore car sitting here and to think of this 4,300 foot long free span tram going up here to this mountain. I fly the drone up there expecting to find everything I want to know about this, and unfortunately, from the location, I knew if I would have took off from the original terminal location down at the mill site, I would not have even made it up to the where the building sat for the mine, because DJI only allows you to fly so high with that drone above where it takes off from. You're never supposed to get above 400 feet above the ground, which I really didn't. But the mountains go almost straight up for quite a ways. So they have a maximum ceiling you can fly above your takeoff point. Well, when I got to where the buildings were, I was at the maximum altitude I could make that drone go. So as much information as I found about where the buildings were, and the buildings really aren't there anymore, I knew there was more above there. So that prompted a second trip to find a different location to fly from. So yeah, the second trip, I hiked into the Last Chance mine again, where they built the terraces for their buildings, much the same kind of hogback situation. They just carved out some steps to put a level of buildings in there. I flew from there across this basin, and finally I was able to lay eyes on some of the workings that you could see from Google Earth. You could tell that there was some little tailing piles, and one of the things about the mine, the main part of the mine itself, is if you're trying to find a waste rock pile to determine the size of that mine, you're not going to find it because it's so steep. As soon as they dump the waste rock, it just disappeared over the mountainside. So I was able to find a couple spots that had caved in. You could tell there was some workings there. And then I fly over and I find the old portal to the mine. And at this point, I'm still not sure, is this a crosscut into the vein, or is this a incline shaft? What is this thing? So I fly down below the portal just a little bit, and here I see this perfectly intact hoist. It was an air-operated hoist. Every part of it's there. I've never seen that in this part of the country. Most of them, something's robbed off of it. If you find one of these, it's not whole, ever. This one's completely whole. The airline's still connected to it. So that told me that this is most likely an incline shaft going down at about a 45-degree angle, because that's what most of those veins are in that area. And the cable's still going from the hoist up to the portal. You can clearly trace it along the top of the ground up there. Now all the buildings are completely gone. Either the snow wiped them out, or they rotted away and then the snow wiped them out, but there's nothing left of the buildings. But the bowl wheel for the tram is completely intact up there. The braking system for the tram is still there. And there's a couple of old stoves laying around up on the mountainside. But that perfectly intact hoist just amazed me. I wish we could get that out of there and put it in a museum. You just don't see those in that kind of condition ever around here, ever. So that was kind of the highlight to spot that thing. And I'm worried one of these days a big snowslide come down there. I'm sure that thing's very heavy because it's completely full of cable too. But I'm afraid one of these days something's going to happen and that thing's going to wind up down in the bottom of the canyon, just tore up as it tumbles off the mountainside. But yeah, I just loved seeing all that old history sitting there. So when I was looking at that big bull gear, or that bull wheel that's sitting up there, sure enough, right above it, perfectly intact, a green glass insulator, indicating they had power there. So from the accounts and actually seeing a glass insulator sitting there above the bull wheel, 100% confirmed they had power. How they got it there, again, I have no idea. So am I going to hike in there? Oh boy. I would love to put my hands on that hoist and that bull gear and the braking system, but I'm not sure it's really worth the danger involved to get over there. I mean, that is some steep, steep country. And I adventured around a little bit around the last chance vein, and walking across those old scree that's on the hillside, all that old scree, boy, that wakes you up right now. So I'm not sure. Maybe I won't say a no, but it would take some convincing to convince me to go hiking in there, I think. So does this wrap up the Cornucopia? No, there's so many more stories to tell about that mine. This is just one of those stories. So yeah, there's a lot more story to tell.